Rev up your engines!
Well, guess what? We American taxpayers are now slaves to interest payments. And it's not our interest payments for the federal government, because the federal government basically is bankrupt because they worked on borrowed money and the interest rate was almost zero. Now the interest rate is higher, so here's what's happened. Listen to this. The interest on the federal debt is now so immense it consumes 40% of all personal income tax taken in. The largest source of revenue for the federal government is devoted to just servicing the debt, not even paying it down. Saying the thing is, for decades, the interest rate was almost nothing. So the government kept borrowing. But now the interest rates are up. Did the government stop borrowing? No, they're still borrowing. And all they do is they say, oh, we'll have a meeting. Okay, we'll raise the debt ceiling. We'll keep raising it. We'll never pay the debt. We can barely pay the interest. If 40% of your taxpayer dollars is paying the interest now, maybe eventually 100% of it will just go to pay the interest, and the principles never change. It goes on forever, right? You can't just keep spending money and borrowing it and expect you're not going to be able to pay it back. In this case, they can barely pay the interest back. What about the principal? Interest rates for the fiscal year, just the interest payment is going to be over $1 trillion. That's just the interest payment. The principal isn't even touched. The interest payments in October were greater than the expenses for the Departments of Agriculture, Education, Energy, Homeland Security, Justice, State, Transportation, and Veterans Affairs, as well as the EPA and NASA combined. So they keep borrowing money. The interest rates go up. That doesn't slow them down. It just makes the debt bigger and bigger. And that's where our taxpayer dollars are going, to pay the interest on money the government has borrowed instead of being fiscally responsible, and stop wasting money on ridiculous projects that aren't needed and pushing for this, we're going to have windmills everywhere giving us electricity that cost a fortune. Don't create that much electricity. And that kind of stuff just goes on. They're spending a ton of money on Amtrak now to make the Amtrak stations look better so more people will ride them. Hey, the tracks are falling apart. Maybe fix the tracks instead of making the stations look Gucci when they have trains that can't even go over 100 miles an hour on the tracks because the tracks are falling apart. The government always does everything backwards, And they're doing it with our taxpayer money. Well, a power grid operator is warning people that if they're going to shut down this coal plant, they're going to leave people in many states with a lack of electricity. PJM Interconnection, it coordinates all these power plants, and this serves 65 million consumers in the mid-coast on the Atlantic, said that if they shut down this coal plant outside of Baltimore, people are going to run out of electricity because there's nothing to replace it with. Now, the company that runs it, Talon Energy, says they intend to deactivate the plant in June 2025 as part of a settlement with Sierra Club. Okay, so now the Sierra Club is affecting where we get our electricity from. Some kind of agreement they had with them over God knows what kind of suit that was done in court. And so this guy that works for this company says, and I quote, the exiting from coal-fired power plants in the coming 12 to 24 months is going to create a major reliability concern for the state of Maryland. The Sierra Club wants it out, but people in Maryland and the states that it's connected to, they want to have electricity, right? Now this plant creates 1,295 megawatts, enough to power more than 1 million homes, and they're planning on shutting it down because the greenies have decided they don't want it in Maryland anymore, right? There's nothing to replace it with. If you people are sad because you don't have electricity, well, I guess it's your own fault. Go watch birds instead with your binoculars, right? Nobody follows up any of this. They think, well, we'll get rid of this. It's bad. Yeah, I'm sure it is bad. But the alternative, not having any electricity, hey, for most people, they don't care. They want their electricity, right? And if you think anything that's government run and something like the Sierra Club is going to know anything about electrical grids, you're out of your mind. Check it out. This guy's saying Tesla's wrap may be just as bad, if not worse, than their regular paint quality. You can buy a Tesla and they'll wrap it for you for a whopping $8,000. But they don't do such a hot job. Now they call it, and I quote, colored paint protection film. Guy's got brand new Model Y. What does he say? The film was poorly applied, noticeable defects, and the finish wasn't much to talk about either. There's bald patches at the edges, slight bubbling on the $8,000 forest green wrap. There are even open seams where joining film pieces didn't overlap. And despite being advertised as a gloss finish, the forest green is a duller shine than expected. For $8,000, you get a crappy wrap, right? You go all over the world Especially in the United States, guys will wrap your car for $3-4 to do a phenomenal job. I am not particularly a fan of wrap because it's plastic crap over your car. Guess what? The UV rays of the sun are going to fade it. You get scratches. It'll rip, pieces will tear off, it'll look like crap. It's not like paint that's all bonded on. If anything, the heat of the sun makes the paint bond even better. Well, I'm not a big fan of wrap, but I've seen some excellent wraps that people did, at least when they were brand new. And this was a brand new Model Y, and it looked like crap already. Just shows you, quality is not a thing for Elon. You know, he's living in La La Land. Now he's in Austin, which is kind of funny because everybody always laughed. They said all the wackos in Texas go to Austin, so I guess he decided to join them, right? Kaizen says, is octane 88 not good for octane 87 engines? What do you think? 88 octane gasoline is 15% ethanol, and 87 is only 10%. What do you think? Well, I got to agree with you there. You know, an ultra-modern car probably won't bother because they have computers. If it's less than 4 years old, they can probably, you know, compensate for the difference between 10% ethanol in your gasoline and 15% ethanol in your gasoline, right? The really old ones wouldn't. It'd screw them up. Now, the problem is most of the cars for the last 20 so years or even more, they're designed so they can work perfectly fine on 10% ethanol. The additives that they put in the gasoline to counteract anything that the alcohol, ethanol is going to do to your car will keep it running perfectly fine. Now, of course, the other problem is you can't store even the 10% ethanol gasoline for very long because then it starts coming apart faster. Pure gasoline, you can store a lot longer, but once you start putting ethanol in, it starts breaking down into its components faster when it's stored, so you can't store it for very long. But you bump it up to 88 octane gas that has 15% ethanol. They didn't come out and say, nobody can tell. It hasn't been out long enough to see if it's got long-term damage. Right now, I've seen people put it in older cars and they won't run right at all. Too much alcohol for an old car, like one with a carburetor on it, it's just too much. It'll mess up the carburetors, the rubber diaphragm, and the fuel pump. In modern cars, like the last 4 or 5 years, they'll probably run okay. But I personally wouldn't want to push it. What if they find out, that extra 5%, it's destroying the fuel injectors, damaging the valves? Who knows? But of course, the bottom line is the more alcohol you put in gasoline, the worse gas mileage you get because ethanol has about 20% less British thermal units energy than regular gasoline. So it has 20% less energy. And for reasons of inefficiency of machinery and stuff, you generally, if you use something like E85, that's 85% ethanol, 15% gasoline that you can use in flex fuel cars, if you use that, you generally get about 25% worse gas mileage. For some reason, the inefficiency of it is not just that it has less energy, but the way it's burned and used. So you're going to get horrible gas mileage with it too. So if you switch from 10% ethanol to 15% ethanol, guess what? Your gas mileage is going to go down because it has less energy. The farmers love it because they're selling their corn to make ethanol. And that's what most of the farmers are doing with their corn these days. So they're making tons of money. They don't care if you get worse gas mileage. What the hell? We're making our money growing corn. Well, I warn you about Stellantis, Jeep, Chrysler, not knowing what they're doing with electronics. Well, more than 32,000 hybrid Jeep Wranglers have been recalled because they might start on fire. Guess what? They didn't build the batteries right, and as usual, here's their solution. You can bring your Jeep to the dealer and we'll see if we can fix it with the software update or whether we have to replace the expensive battery. You remember they tried that same crap with the Chevy electric car and then they had to recall all the batteries after they said, we got a software fix. No, software isn't fixing the problems. The problem is crap construction quality. A regular Jeep was bad enough with its electrical system. A hybrid one's even worse. And listen to what happened. Stellantis determined that 8 of the hybrid Wranglers had caught fire while they were turned off and parked. 6 of the vehicles were being charged. Others were just sitting there. They believed no one was hurt in the fires. I warned you, the quality control of that company is garbage. And hybrid technology is so much higher than regular gasoline, right? You got gasoline, electric, because they're hybrids. They're not electric vehicles. They're hybrid. They have gasoline engine and electric motor and electric battery, right? Worst of both worlds when it comes to a company like Stellantis, Fiat, Chrysler, Jeep, right? They're just trying to whore out the Jeep name and make it as cheap as they can. A bunch of them now, they're making them in Italy. They're not Jeeps, They're just using the name because they own the company. They're a European company. They're building the crap in Italy. They tried to sell those Renegades. Jeep Renegade, had the song, right? Those are just rebadged Fiat 500 four-wheel drive piled piles of junk. Ask anybody who's had a Renegade. They'll tell you, hey, they're Renegade on Renegade. They want to get the heck out of there. And now the hybrid versions, guess what? They're starting on fire because they didn't build them right. And they're trying to wheedle away with, a software update will fix it. Don't worry about it. Because those batteries are expensive and there's no way they're going to replace those batteries unless they're dragged kicking and screaming into court and forced to do it. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.